So our third speaker is Dr. Cesar Constantino. He's a VP of Marketing and Sales for Cemai. He leveraged advantages from the Industry 4.0, big data, and cloud computing to create value in the cement manufacturing with next-generation human-enhanced ML and artificial intelligence predictive and prescriptive maintenance-related services. He has more than 20 years of leadership in cement and concrete industry, pursuing operational excellence and growing continual growth through the engineering, R&D, business development, process, quality, and execution. Constantino has served as several ACI board and board-level committees, including board of directors, certification programs, educational activities, in addition to his membership in several ACI technical committees. He's currently past chair of the board and member of the executive committee of ASTM International and a part of the industry advisory board for the Civil and Architectural Engineering Department at the University of Miami. He has served as industry task group chair for the Concrete Science Platform and the MIT Concrete Sustainability Hub. Constantino holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering, a master's degree in structural engineering, and a doctorate degree in construction material from the University of Texas at Austin. Welcome, Cesar.
So if you cannot see me above the podium, I need to move to the side. So just holler, make sure you bring that up early, right? So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Julissa, thanks for the invite. I'm going to have to say that the fine print at the very top means everything I say comes from me, and it's not with anybody else. I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth, okay? So if some things you agree with or you don't agree with, just talk to me and we'll make sure we take care of it. First things first, in our culture, in the cement and manufacturing world, we always start with a safety minute. And I want to have a reflection for everybody to go safer at home after this convention. So this is a slide that simply talks about furniture tip-overs. And why am I talking about tip-overs? Because ASTM, we all talked about slump earlier today, but ASTM works in 90-plus industry sectors. And one of the technical committees on consumer products, for example, has developed a type of label and so forth, as you see here, that is to be affixed to furniture. All I'm asking is when you go home, you make sure that you identify the risks, that you secure any furniture that you may have bought recently, and you confirm that if you buy new furniture, that it has what it takes to be safe. This is every 17 minutes somebody gets injured in the United States. We don't want that. And indeed, as an ASTM standard for purposes of safety, this has traveled the world. So it doesn't matter if the furniture is manufactured in Sweden. If it's used here, you got to use the same label so people can get it. So it inspires a little bit about the discussion of one concrete. We need to be safe globally. And with ASTM, again, many of us think of it in the day-to-day test methods that we use. I would argue that serving at the board level in ASTM, it's all about safety, as I just documented. It's all about consumer confidence. Did that concrete masonry unit deliver what it was supposed to? And in the end, quality of life. We got this hotel, we're having comfort here because of all kinds of specs that were met in order for us to be here. So that's what ASTM is all about. If I were to ask you what is ASTM, probably many of you have your own tidbits in terms of what it is. I'll simply highlight some features for purposes of then bridging why I'm a proponent that ASTM could be one of the international standard bodies that can leverage the one concrete world, as Julissa is calling it. And it all starts with some facts and figures. About 33,000 members from 155 countries participate in ASTM technical work. There are about 8,700 standards referenced and adopted internationally from ASTM. And this is going to come back soon because I'm going to talk about ASTM and then the next word that I'm going to use, international. Okay? So the fact that there's 8,700 standards used elsewhere, referenced and utilized globally, that means ASTM already has a foot in the door in that many countries, in that many places. And as I said earlier, over 90 industry sectors. So one of the things that I did learn is what works in other industries that somehow we could maybe explore what would be a nice fit in the cement and concrete world. I'll give you an example. We talked about the test method that takes 6 months or 1 year. I'm not comparing. I'm just giving you food for thought, okay? So don't shoot me. But the Cannabis Committee in ASTM International generates standards faster than you would ever dream. I mean, they are one of the most recent committees, and they already have dozens of standards, and they create them in 6 months at a time. And okay, it's a different industry, it's a different sector, I get it. It's not durability of 200 or 1,000 years. That being said, there's some things that we can learn in terms of how they debate, how there is consensus in those committees. How is it that they can arrive at some elements or foundational elements to agree to move forward in one direction? And last but not least, 147 technical committees and over 2,000 subcommittees. When it comes to offices, yes, there's offices throughout the world. And again, in an attempt to have the one opportunity that standards can travel and can fit the needs for different parts of the world. Now, when I say ASTM standards, they're all voluntary, and they are not to be enforced until you put them in a contract, codes, or laws. And this is important because many people, as you travel the world, they may say, well, if ASTM says so, then it must be a requirement. And it isn't, because they're voluntary. Now, what's important here, as I talk about international framework here and how we could bridge the world, how we can bridge the Atlantic, how we can bridge the Pacific, is I'll ask you a question. We have here Jose Alfredo. Why is ONCE standard not being used in the United States? Is it a Mexican standard? Is it, and the reason I put you on the spot is because I went to Mexico, and actually with the USMCA agreement, there is already consensus that standards that are Mexican, Canadian, or American can actually be cross-referenced across borders. So we have that in law, but the industry is probably not adopting it. But that doesn't mean you can't use it. It's like the 1157 performance-based cement. It's been there for decades, and nobody in the marketplace decides to put it in the construction documents. But what it really makes a standard to be principle, from my point of view, and I think ASTM would back me up on this, is that there are 6 principles established by the World Trade Organization. And these principles are all driven for purposes of facilitating trade. What you want is nothing to prevent or to lock the ability for trade to occur. And the other bit that the World Trade Organization did as part of the Technical Barriers to Trade Committee decision is you do not designate any one single entity, or you do not designate the one part in the world that is going to decide about standards. It's going to be like the 50 states. You know, every country is going to have the ability. I mean, every country is sovereign, right? So they have the ability to do as they choose. So there's no the one thing. However, the market is going to pick the best. And the market will find whichever standard entity is the one that works fast, diligently, and it's open, and it's available for them to work easily. Again, it matters because the whole idea here is to not have any obstacles. The ability here is to facilitate that there is public-private partnerships and that we advance. So what are these principles? These principles are fairly simple, and ACI follows them. There's nothing here that we don't do in ACI. These principles are openness, transparency, impartiality, and consensus as the development of the standards occur, effectiveness and relevance, coherence, and consideration of developing nations. You meet these requirements, back to the ONCE example. If they meet these requirements, their standards are deemed international already. Maybe they're not practiced as such. That's what it takes to do it. So one world is important, and for the one concrete. But here's the piece that I struggle when I travel the world. What I find is, actually, let me ask you. The title says, the question is for you. What strikes you from the logos in the left-hand side of the slide versus the right-hand side of the slide? What strikes you? If there's one thing. Yes, and what letter do you find in there that is extra? The fourth letter. Everything is A. So everywhere in the world you go is American, 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 American. So you're not international. Even though I just told you that we are. I didn't put ACI on purpose because you already have it up there. But so A has an A in there too, right? And so what we need to find out is that there's no difference between left and right. Well, they do have an I, and that I means international. So because it's in the logo, we believe it? No. It's got to be the right standard for the right application. It has to be developed in an open, effective, transparent, All of the above that I mentioned before. That's what makes a standard international. In fact, if you have a federation that gets together and everybody gets appointed because they're afraid of the president of the country, probably that's not a standard that will have the quality that makes it travel the world. And that's one of the things that ASTM has done in some areas, such as a time where everybody needed a face barrier, everybody needed a mask a few months ago, a few years ago. Well, that standard was developed in 6 months too, in a health situation. And ASTM had the platform, had the backing, had the process in place to be able to work fast, and all to the point that the same standard is now recommended by the World Health Organization. So when we talk about ASTM, again, it's that openness, and it's about everybody working together to try to get things done in a way that it doesn't matter if you're in North America or in Europe or in Asia, you all can participate. Just like you are here now participating in ACI technical work, you could do so in ASTM, not even traveling to committee weeks or conventions. You can do that remotely on purpose. The fact of the matter is that a technical committee meeting recently in committee F47, actually the chair of the committee was in the space station. So he opened the meeting from there. So it's not about remote work anymore. You can work when you want to work. And the fact is that just like we can bridge the world, as I'm showing here, we can bridge the Atlantic. This is very hard because, especially, maybe you from the Czech Republic can correct me, but I understand that in Europe, at an EU level, there is a requirement. The standards for use in Europe have to be done in Europe. Yes. So how on earth are we going to have one concrete if already it starts saying, no, this is the border? Having said that, when there are times of need, I think opportunity knocks the door. And so here are some areas where there's already been agreements, and this is not like, let's open the floodgates, because it's one thing at a time. But the principle is what I'm trying to convey. CEN and ASTM have already signed memorandums of cooperation in certain areas. Some of them are plastics, some of them are fuels, and what we have observed is that in some key strategic areas, there is the opportunity to collaborate. And why? The collaboration is so that we're not repeating work and then ending up in different places, but rather trying to collaborate such that what comes out can be applicable in both sides of the Atlantic. A very important report that I'm sharing with you here is by the OECD, entity based in Paris, France. And when they themselves in Europe are saying, tell you what, we took a look at ASTM, and it seems as though what they're doing makes sense. And specifically in areas such as additive manufacturing, next door, 3D printing, right? Especially in areas such as that, ASTM has what it takes to carry the ball and lead us somewhere. Similar in sustainable aviation fuels. You know, you got the Boeing people, you have the Airbus people, everybody's coming together and they're coming up with what is sustainable fuel. Well, have we attempted to come up with what is sustainable concrete or green cement or whatever they're calling it these days? No, we haven't. But other industries are doing it. They're doing it within ASTM. And the opportunity then, as I lay, is ASTM could be, I'm not saying it has to be, but it could be one that actually helps spur the momentum and get all of us to talk together. When you talk about why ASTM again, it's everywhere. Remember I said 90 industry sectors. So even though concrete is, left and right for us here today, front and center, up and down, over in ASTM, you need a question, you open the door, next door is another technical committee. So whether it's glass, copper, air quality, soil and rock, I mean, you name it, glass, whatever it is, you're going to have experts. You're going to have people that are going to help you in terms of performance of building, et cetera, at your disposal. And what I'm thinking here is the future, because committees that have worked with cement and concrete in ASTM date back hundreds of years. Cement Technical Committee 01 was established in 1902. And Doug, don't kill me, that number is last year's. I don't know where the number is now, because he's the chair of the committee, so we have the luxury of an expert here from that committee. Concrete and concrete aggregates, CO9, established in 1914. So I'm not here to tell you that we're going to measure cubes in the U.S., nor cylinders in Europe, nor millimeters or inches. I'm not going to say that. But what I will say is that new and emerging technologies have the opportunity, now that we bridge the Atlantic, now that we're talking to people in the space, that we should be able to then, from this point forward, new and emerging technology should be able to have one common language. But we can start now. And that way, standards such as those more innovative that continue to evolve in ASTM. If a test method doesn't advance in a while, or in ASTM, it's going to be dropped after a decade or so. But if they are current, because there's people that are using them, they will be continually updated. And every time there's like a year -22, for example, that means it's the last revision of that standard. There's some alternative supplementary cementitious materials. There is a ground glass pozzolan as well. And this standard that I listed there, Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the reactivity of SCMs. The research that went into creating that standard, wasn't it done by Rylam? So here's an example of why I am a believer in collaboration. So this standard was done relatively quickly in ASTM space. It didn't take 10 years. But what it was the coordination of faculty, scientists, and so forth. Research was fundamentally done with the Rylam entity. It was brought to the ASTM process, and voila, we have a standard. That probably would have taken longer if you tried to develop in Europe, because in Europe you still have to have everybody can work together, but then every country then has to come together, right? So, there is a method to the madness, and I've seen it in ASTM that it can work. When it comes to cements in particular, yes, originally the committee was working in hydraulic cements, but now the non-hydraulic cements are also being tackled and looked at in the technical committee work. So, what do I envision going forward as we, again, have the opportunity to work together? There's a new approach to establish, standard growth and standard knowledge. And one of the things is communications. What you're going to hear from me is that we need to get people to come here early. Everybody wants to be in the 3D printing room. No, they need to be in the standards. You don't have 3D printing until you are here first. These are boring conversations. You say hey, let's get together, have coffee, and talk about standards. Maybe you get a friend. Okay? But that's the one that you need. That's the one that is going to accelerate the adoption of new and emerging technologies that we need to hit the mark of 2050 carbon neutral concrete, for example. So, ASTM does have a tool, the compass, in case you've used it or you haven't used it. But one tinkering that we did with ACI just last year was, many of you probably already have, this is compass, okay? So it's basically to exchange information. Excellent. You should try it. If you have ACI 3NT Plus, notice that, you have all of these. Where do you go? Well, the idea is that if we can facilitate the information flow and have standards as data, all of a sudden now AI can play a factor. All of a sudden information flow is easy. So you click in your 318 code and boom, you have to click twice. I want to make it one click, but now you got to click twice. And then you get to the compass of ASTM, and vice versa. Now that you're ASTM, if you need a certification, you go back to ACI certifications. And the idea is the easier the communication, the better. And we start young. We start with people in universities. And for this concept, ASTM has created the accelerate concept, or the accelerate path. And what this is I would invite any professor, if we have professors here in the crowd. Actually, that's a question. Do we have professors here? Thank you. Now you win. Come talk to me later. Every PhD dissertation or every master's thesis should have one appendix or one chapter that's, say you're developing a new test method or you're developing a new way of doing something. Have the student include a chapter at the end, appendix 10, propose standard specification for whatever I just created. Because when you do have something, at least in draft mode, now you can bring that to a technical committee and say, here it is, work on it. And believe it or not, that's the speed that we're losing now, is that by the time that the development happens and that the standard bodies take it, you just waste too much time. And I would argue that please share the word and help us with that. I believe that accelerate starts with them, but we need to get professors as well. They're doing it in other industries. That's why I'm a believer in that. When you look at exotechnology, when you look at drones and unmanned aircraft, when you're looking at what NASA is doing with the 3D printing to build in Mars, these guys are already in ASTM committee meetings working on these things, and they're doing it. We're not doing it in the concrete construction in planet Earth. And I'm seeing people do it for Mars. So yes, we can do it. I'm a believer in that. So that's why I put a challenge there as Cement and Concrete 2050 Net Zero Accelerate path. But it requires us in this room, as you know, we have in ACI a Center of Excellence specifically looking into this. So what I'm saying is we're going to need test methods. We're going to need specifications. We're going to need all these things because notwithstanding how much clinker we reduce, there's going to be some things we have to worry about. This is from the Global Cement and Concrete Association Roadmap to Net Zero. If we, in ACI, the building code were to say, you can put 0, of this, 0 of that, yeah, as engineers, we can reduce the carbon footprint of concrete, yes. From the manufacturing side of materials, yes, we can move the levers there and lower it to 0. But there's what I call accelerate territory here is, carbon capture type of test methods, carbon capture type of specifications. Because ultimately, I'll pick an easy one that is not easy, right? Is recarbonization. They are counting that there's going to be X percentage, what is that, 6%? That CO2 that is going to actually be recarbonated into concrete so the concrete reabsorbs. Well, how do we measure that? There's people working on it in different places, but if already we know that something so important is already going to have different ways of measuring it, we're not going to have the one concrete world that we're aspiring. So I have also seen that ASTM, from the referencing standpoint, is very easy to work with. So what's on green, meaning if you want to reference ASTM standards and regulation or use a normative reference or a code reference, that's easy. It's open to everybody in planet Earth. Now, MOU partners are those who sign with ASTM by country the opportunity that they can then adopt or modify the standards or use them for the development of their own in their own country. So with ASTM, that is already signed by around 120 countries, which means we have the ability for the country that you're from to be able to carry on with doing something like that. And this is just examples I put. This is from South Africa. They're putting specifications from ASTM there. This is from, where is that? I cannot remember. You can probably find it. Oh, no, this is an ISO that actually is using a normative reference. This is from Philippines. And at the end of the day, the idea is we can do this. We've seen it work. And so I'll just wrap up so we can have any questions you may have. Simply suggesting that it is about collaboration. We heard the word before. I echo those sentiments. And it's about helping the world work better, as we say in ASTM. It is international. It's about being diligent, to being agile, to be a partner in what you need. And it's about innovations, looking forward to what we need. So thank you very much. I'd like to bridge the gaps.